Welcome to the Dark Mind Podcast. Friends and familiars, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Dark Mind Podcast, where we explore the boundless realm of dark literature and film. On today's show, I have an author who has woven a dark and haunting tale of sirens, betrayal, and survival. She's joining me today to discuss the third book in the Bloodbound series, entitled Song of the Sea. So without further ado, join me as we delve into the dark insight of Sabrina Voerman. All right, friends and familiars, we are live on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, Trovo, and Kick with Sabrina Voerman here to discuss her recent novel, Song of the Sea. Sabrina, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me again. I really appreciate you having me back.
Absolutely, it's great to have you back. Thank you for joining me on this fifth day of February 2025. After reading Ashen Heart, the second book in the Bloodbound series, I was eager for the next installment, Song of the Sea. The story weaves a darkly romantic portrayal of sirens, both feminine and formidable, as they fight a brutal war against men who seek to consume them as delicacies and objectify them as novelties. With a touch of witchcraft and a strong vein of vampirism, Song of the Sea delivers a uniquely dark and compelling tale. So thank you for joining me on the show today to discuss it.
Thank you. Can you write the blurb of my next book, please?
Absolutely. I am all over that shit.
You nailed it.
Well, let's see here. The book, and listeners at home, just so you know, at the beginning of the book, she lists a pronunciation guide for all the characters, which I looked at, but I'll be damned if I can remember it. So as we go through this, I might need you to prompt me on how to properly pronounce these names.
Absolutely.
So the book follows, is it Asa?
Isa.
Isa. Okay.
Yeah.
The book follows Isa, a siren, and her sisters who once provided food to humans after a volcanic eruption left their land barren. But in a cruel twist of fate, man developed a taste for siren flesh, turning them into the most hunted source of food. So, forced to hide in the ocean depths for over a decade, Isa longs for the surface. When she finally rises for a breath of fresh air, she's almost immediately caught in a net, auctioned to the highest bidder, and placed in a circus sideshow. And that is where the story begins. So the idea of sirens being destroyed by their own goodwill is a compelling subversion of traditional myth. What inspired you to take this approach?
So the inspiration really came from when I originally wrote these books. They were based in our world, and I wanted to pull from something that happened in history. And so in the late 1700s, a volcano erupted in Iceland and actually decimated almost all of Iceland. There was famine in quite a few areas, but Iceland in particular, because they have such a small food source compared to some other places. And so it just kind of opened up this door of how can I have sirens and humans commingle? And I think with the fairy tales, they do have really grim outcomes traditionally. I mean, the grim versions are grim. And I wanted to kind of dive back into how can I make this horrific? And sirens being so close to humans in their anatomy, their makeup, it borders on that cannibalistic, is it cannibalism or is it not? That's kind of the question. And just really lean into this theme of greediness that humans have.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. Their composition of fish and human. And to kind of back up, you were talking about Iceland and some volcanic activity back in history, like a genuine historical period.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah.
I think they're still having volcanic eruptions. I think it's just a very ongoing process. I think in 2008, they had a volcanic eruption and it shut down planes because no one could fly through it. And then they currently have a lot of volcanic action going on right now, too.
Okay.
Yeah. Really leans into the land of fire and ice name.
Yeah, definitely. Well, which traditional elements of the siren myth did you preserve and which did you add?
I kind of wanted to take as scientific approach as I could with these. I think a lot of siren themes or movies, books, what have you, they develop legs when they're on land. That was a bit too magical for me. I wanted to put Isa in a situation where she's not a helpless character, but the geography, the landscape that she's forced into when she surfaces forces her to become an almost helpless character in certain situations. Obviously, she does the best she can without legs, but there's a lot of things that go against her survival, essentially, because she's not in where she's supposed to be. And the whole point is getting her back to the ocean where she belongs. And I didn't really pull from too much. However, I did touch on the Rusalka, which is a Slavic mythology of drowned women and becoming some sort of siren nymph entity if they're killed via being drowned. And that ties into Nikolai's childhood a little bit and the reason why he begins to interact with sirens. So I pulled from a little bit here and there, but I didn't want to go like full Little Mermaid. Oh,
yeah.
But I do have Isa doesn't talk for a lot of the book. And that was kind of a play on the Little Mermaid not having a voice.
Yeah. Except she had like a tactical reason for it.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that I did notice is that you did seem to keep it technically accurate as if mermaids were an actual, species. Had to keep her in water. The gills are in her neck, was it?
Yeah, they would be in her neck. And then she also can breathe air. So kind of like an amphibian.
Okay. So coming to the surface wasn't necessary. It was just like, being an amphibian, it's part of my habitat, even though I can breathe down here, just being confined down here is not natural. That's the thing.
Yeah, it was just like too isolating to be down there.
Mm. And she was one of the last as well.
Yes, in a way.
Yeah.
In a way.
Well, if I start leaning into spoilers, just say stop, be quiet. So you mentioned a Slavic mythological influence. Any other historical or mythological influences that guided your portrayal?
That was kind of it. Like I said, I wanted to go really as accurate and scientific as possible and what could be possible if sirens existed. And then tried to keep it as original as possible. But then I have the Little Mermaid influence with Aurelia and Prince Erikr, except I tweaked that story a little bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying Erikr. I don't have to. Now I've heard it pronounced out loud. Yeah, and it actually is a very good pronunciation guide. I just I don't retain information very well.
Oh, neither do I. I had to re-look up how to pronounce these characters' names.
Oh, yeah. Well, how do the other characters in the book react to the siren's fate? Are they mourned, feared, or forgotten?
Well, I would say that for Nikolai, they are mourned in a way because he doesn't meet every siren, of course, but he has a guilt that he carries with him for a lot of death he's caused in the past. And this is kind of his way of seeking atonement is, can I help one person, two people, that sort of thing? And who's facing adversity that I have an advantage to assist? And that's kind of his way of penance, I suppose. So he feels it. And not a lot of other characters in this world I've created necessarily feel much towards it because it is an isolated area with the sirens. But I'd say Prince Erica is a little upset because he was obsessed with devouring sirens. And then eventually Kaivale, the country that the book is based in, which is a fictional area, they all kind of consumed this and created an extinction of sirens, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. It was almost like he was doing service work like an addict, you know, making amends for past, only instead of drinking and drugging, it was engaging in severe visceral violence.
Yeah.
Well, how does the book explore the balance between survival and compassion? Do you think there's a lesson to be learned from the siren's fate? And, you know, the expression that always pops into my head is no good deed goes unpunished.
So great. What does that mean for our futures?
Yeah.
I think a lot of times when it comes to any sort of survival, we resort back to an instinct. We resort back to a selfishness of saving ourselves. And I think that's where the compassion comes into play, is that Isa could be greedy in her sense of get me back to the ocean, save me. But there's things she does along the way that shows that she cares about the people and dog helping her. And she wants them to live. There's points where she would have given her own to save these companions of hers. And it's no longer just about survival, but it's about surviving with this other entity who's helping her.
Yeah, and I mean, she has her own regret, not for perpetrated violence, but for indirectly, and I don't think this is a spoiler, indirectly getting quite a few sirens killed by, what was it she was doing? She came up to the surface when she wasn't supposed to?
Yeah, so there was a war going on between the sirens and the humans because they were, they didn't want to be eaten. And she wanted to help. She thought, if I go up there and I join this fight, it's for the better. But they were trying to protect her. And it's like when a teenager or a kid wants to do something with an adult and you're like, no, you're just going to get in the way. And that's kind of how it was. She kind of got in the way and there were higher stakes and people or sirens got killed in the way.
Well, adjacent to Isa in the story is your vampire character, Nikolai. Could you tell us, because I was trying to remember from Ashen Heart, could you tell us what happened with regard to Nikolai and the Sirens between the time periods of Ashen Heart and Song of the Sea, if you can do that without, producing any spoilers?
Yeah, so in Ashen Heart, we see glimpses of Nikolai. He does have a couple of chapters where Terenia engages with him. And essentially he has I guess you could say, a fallout with his brothers, and he flees and he ends up in Kaivale. And that's when he started his siren saving. I don't want to call it a business, but I guess hobby. And, he was far away from his pursuers and having sort of something to do, like I said, to atone for the things that he had done, because, his hands aren't clean from his past. And it gave him a will to go on, a reason to keep fighting. Because if he was able to fight for someone, he was able to get through every day. And that was through helping sirens. So there's kind of a 10-year period, and Song of the Sea is kind of the end of that 10-year. And Ashen Heart is like the beginning of those 10 years, there is a lot of parts of it unwritten. I actually have written his whole story, which I don't think will ever be published. It was sort of for my own way of understanding who he was from childhood to essentially Song of the Sea.
And I have not read the first book in the series, so I don't know. Would explaining the rules of nature, for lack of a better term, of your vampires, would that spoil anything in any previous books? I just think it's interesting or it would be interesting for people that have not read your books, that your vampires, they're not like the traditional vampires. Would that?
Not a spoiler at all, because Blood Coven is a whole different group of characters, and it's very witchcraft focused, and a werewolf in there too. But I think with vampires, they are very overpowered. And throughout history of writing vampires, they're eternal, they're strong, they're fast, they shapeshift, they read minds. There's so much to them that kind of gives them an unfair advantage. And I think it's my love for low fantasy that made me want to write them again as if they were to exist in real life. They don't live forever. They have a shelf life like we all do. They must consume blood, and they can't be in the sun. That's essentially the only rules with my vampires. They're not excessively strong. They're not really any different from me or you.
And Nikolai, so he was just a good street fighter? He didn't have any extra, not superhuman, but a little bit more indestructible than the average person?
Nope, just been fighting since he was a teenager.
Okay. Yeah, that's one thing I remember. I looked on your social media, and it mentions something about you being a witch. And you told me, oh yeah, my friends say that I'm like a pagan witch or something like that. But you're actually probably one of the most, what would I say, humanistic people that I've talked to. Actually, you're like, yeah, I don't believe in any of that.
I'm very atheist. I find a joy in things like tarot, and I don't really dip into astrology or anything, but like I see the appeal, I see the enjoyment, I see where people get a lot of fulfillment and like self-reflection from those things. But yeah, I'm pretty cut and dry atheist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I remember finding that very interesting about you. Well, we've talked about it a little bit, but would you say, at least with regard to the story, were Nikolai's interactions with the sirens more of a conflict, a partnership, or a test of his morality?
I would say a test of his morality, because without spoiling anything, he has an ulterior motive. And I think people debate this all the time, whether or not we can truly be altruistic. Can we, as I'm on the same page as you?
Yeah.
Because even if you're doing something 100% for someone else, there's still something you get out of that, whether it's pride or joy, you're still getting some amount of fulfillment. And so he has an ulterior motive, which I won't say, but he's not doing it for any negative reason. So he is doing it for the most positive, save a life reason. But everybody has a stake, right? Everybody has something, a reason why they started doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody's looking out for their own interest. And it's funny, like, I don't know if you subscribe to any of Nietzsche's philosophy, but, you know, his concept of the prime mover being the will to power, like the seeking and obtainment of power. I remember this one philosopher saying, he's like, well, what about the ascetics that just give up everything? They don't want to achieve power in any way. They don't want to have people following them. They just want to meditate by themselves in the middle of nowhere. Well, they're attempting to achieve power over themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, I digress. Sometimes I go on these philosophical rants. Well, so Nikolai survived primarily by street fighting, as I said. And you said, so being a vampire does not give him really any advantage in a fight. He's been doing it since he was young. So how does he, I guess, he doesn't have any regenerative powers either. I'm trying to I'm trying to think of all these things that vampires normally have that your vampires do not. So how does he survive basically with such a violent form of income?
Well, he's a survivalist himself. He can consume blood. And so he goes through it in methods that are as ethical as one can do it. There are sometimes consenting participants for how he consumes. So he doesn't need to purchase a whole lot. He doesn't need a lot of money for the things that we in our capitalistic society require at all times. So he can live a much more down-to-earth, quiet life without needing to work the way we do, I suppose. So he does what he has to for the coin he needs for supplies, that sort of thing. But I also wouldn't think he's above like stealing something every now and then.
A rapscallion. Well, from the moment Isa is caught, Nikolai follows her every move from when she's sold to was it Mr. Zimmer? Zidler, that's what it was. Okay. Mr. Zidler's circus sideshow. So what does the desire to both consume and objectify sirens, whether as curiosities or in a sexualized way, convey about their existence in the story?
It's interesting that you bring up the sexualization because, yes, that is an aspect of it. But when I wrote this, I don't know if it was around the same time as the documentary Blackfish came out, which was about SeaWorld.
Oh, Tillicum?
Yes. Tillicum was actually originally in Victoria, which is on the island I live on. And he got shuffled around a lot due to killing his trainers, I think they were. I would say if I had to choose a 7 deadly sin for this book, it would be greed, because all these characters have greed in some way. And Zidler's greed is money and show and flair. And we do that to animals. You know, you go to, not all aquariums or zoos are bad, but seeing marine life in captivity, it really breaks my heart. So in a way, a lot of Isa's capture, a lot of her time in that circus is me maybe pushing an agenda about animals in captivity and seeing, you know, the orcas in captivity with their heightened intelligence compared to other animals, even compared to humans. Where do we draw the line of what is acceptable and when we should just let nature be nature?
Yeah, so the men that you were talking about that were banging on the tank she was in, trying to get her to do something, speak, and Zidler, was it you said?
Yeah.
Zidler trying to get her to sing, basically put on a show. Yeah. I think the reason I brought up the sexualization of them is because, I don't know, I feel like I remember one of the guys knocking on the tank being described as
ogling.
Shooting her shooting her lascivious looks or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my sirens also don't wear clothing, so they're always going to be exposed. So for her, it wouldn't be a moment of sexualization, but for the humans on the other side, they would very likely sexualize.
Well, how do these themes shape the tone of the story? Does it lean into horror, tragedy, or dark satire?
Definitely tragedy. I do like to write those. I had a lot of fun with body horror in this one, especially later half of the book. I mean, it's throughout a lot of the book, but mostly near the end, I leaned into a lot of body horror, which was a lot of fun. I suppose in a way it could be a dark satire, again, with all the themes I take on, and it's very anti-greed, anti-capitalist, anti-animals in captivity. I'll be the first to admit maybe there's an agenda in my writing. Maybe. We are human, right?
You're sliding it into the subconscious. I got you.
Yeah.
Just as long as you're not going to make us Manchurian candidates, don't program me to be an assassin or something like that.
Definitely not.
Well, in an attempt to protect the sirens, Queen Aurelia?
Yeah.
Okay. Queen Aurelia married King, oh God, I've already forgot it, Ericer?
Ericer, yeah.
Ericer, who then systematically ate her as a delicacy for as long as he could keep her alive. So did Ericer see Aurelia as a true wife, or was the marriage merely a justification for his slow consumption of her?
Initially, it was supposed to be a political marriage, I suppose, because she came up and said, here's food, we'll support you and your country and your people. And at the beginning, that was real. But humans tend to want something, and obviously a siren can't offer certain things. And so there was a little bit of that, plus the influence of the country was still consuming siren, and there's this, oh, it's so amazing, it's so good, we will die to have another taste. Curiosity kind of, it crops up, and he got curious. Why is everybody wanting to taste it? So then eventually he did, and he liked it. So he slowly devoured his wife.
Well, Nikolai's dog, Kashmir, is both his best friend and bodyguard in the story. Certain animals like dogs, I feel, are like the only beings on Earth that are able to give true unconditional love and loyalty. Like we were talking about, can anybody be truly altruistic? I would say maybe dogs. The only reason I'm unsure of that statement is, are they being altruistic? Are they following their instinct? Are they just because they're at the mammalian brain? They don't have the primate brain where, all that rationalization, justification for things takes place. So I don't know. But for now, they are people's best friend, what have you. So do you think dogs and other animals in fiction can serve as moral compasses for human characters?
I think so. I think the way humans love their pets, the way humans would do anything, spend any amount of money to save their animals, and this is not all humans, but many of them, we become so connected to the creatures that love us unconditionally. And I do think that dogs are the closest what we can come to altruism, and they trust you. They trust you with their lives, right? And I think when something's so innocent and not necessarily on the same level of the food chain as us, they don't have the same brains as us, like you mentioned. When something that innocent trusts you and loves you and wants to protect you, it kind of guides you into a direction of wanting to do right by them, Mm-hmm. Like if you accidentally step on a dog's paw, they don't really understand when you're apologizing.
Yeah, although you do.
But you feel so bad about it, right? So I think that Kashmir was definitely keeping Nikolai sane through a lot of his life. And it was cut from the final draft of this one, but I had it in my original that Nikolai found Kashmir at a dog fighting pit and saved him, and he was a bait dog. So he kind of had the same rough upbringing as Nikolai, so he saw a lot of himself in that dog.
The bait dog.
Yes.
You'll have to.
Oh.
I'm not familiar with dog fighting. You better not be either.
Good. So
I will end this right now.
I'll put a little trigger warning. I won't get too deep into it, but anybody who doesn't, want to hear about animal abuse, skip 30 seconds, I guess. But in dog fighting pits, they would put in a smaller dog for the other ones to aggressively attack to become more aggressive.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's awful.
That's dark.
So that's where Nikolai saved Kashmir from.
Oh, that's an interesting backstory, though. Mm-hmm. So let's see here. Would Nikolai be the same character without Kashmir, or does his presence fundamentally shape who Nikolai is?
I don't think Nikolai would be alive without Kashmir. I don't think he would be alive at the beginning of Song of the Sea to engage with Isa had it not been for him. I think he was very much a tether to sanity, and again, something to live for. I think he would be a very different person. I think he'd be a harder person without that dog, because he doesn't really have anyone in his corner. Yeah.
The lone vagabond with his trusty sidekick. Well, after Aurelia's death at the hands of King Iraker, let's just say the king, because I'm just going to continue to screw it up. He falls into a deep depression because, as far as he knows, all the sirens are extinct. However, upon hearing that one has been caught, he emerges from his despair and strikes a deal with a man named Vlad. Capture the siren for him, and in return, he gets Nikolai. Is his interest in the siren purely to continue his disturbing practice, or are there other motives at play?
Mostly for consumption, but also for a show of power. Because if there's one siren left, everyone clearly wants her. And if he's the one to obtain her, he holds the power still. So there's more motives at play, I would say, for sure.
And so was he in an actual clinical depression? I mean, not getting out of bed and stuff like that?
I sort of see him as the generation of people who can't retire. And they're 87, they're still working, they refuse to retire. And the day they do, they'll start to decline.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see it. This is his job is just capturing sirens and eating them. It's his only purpose at that point. There's hints of insanity there that kind of, rumors, I suppose. So it was kind of the only thing that kept him going, but he was also too stubborn to just move on.
Okay. So it doesn't necessarily say anything about his character. It's just kind of like a form of self-preservation.
Yeah, in a way. Because he still held power.
Mm-hmm.
He is the leader somewhere, but the rest of the country was kind of living their lives without needing a leader per se.
Yeah. Well, the men backing Vlad turn out to be Nikolai's brothers, Ivan and Roman. They want Nikolai back in the Brotherhood, fearing that Osleka's instability could lead to war if people discover their pureblood vampire brother is no longer part of the house. So how do Ivan and Roman justify their actions? Do they see themselves as protecting Nikolai, or are their motives purely political?
I think initially their original want for Nikolai back was because it was about keeping family together. As dysfunctional as they are, Roman is very purist in wanting his family under his thumb, I guess. It's not to care about them or take care of them, but he wants them present. He wants to show the world he has the power to keep his family together. And he's not very successful in that. Nikolai left and fled to another country. And the brotherhood that Nikolai left behind you see a lot more of that in Ashenheart's story, but there's uprise, there's tensions between half-bloods and purebloods. So Roman wants him back for the reason of bringing equality back to the brotherhood, but he's also a very power-hungry person, and it shows a weakness that he lost his brother, that his brother ran away. So he doesn't like weakness, doesn't like to show it.
Yeah. And can you define the Brotherhood? I mean, obviously it's a group of brothers, but are they like a political party? Are they...
Yeah, so they're the ruling force of vampires in Osleka, and they have other groups that kind of, half-blood groups and pure-blooded groups, and they just sort of work in their inner circles to keep the vampire, I don't want to say colony, but the vampires of Osleka content. But when we read about it in Ashenheart, it's at the tail end of the Brotherhood's reign. It's kind of in shambles already.
And this is definitely me being just really pedantic. But is there a vampire zero? Because you talk about pedigrees of dogs. There's pure bloods, half bloods. Is there like a vampire zero?
Yeah, actually there is. And not necessarily like a particular character, but at the end of Ashenheart, Roman tells Terenia to beware of the old bloods. And so the old bloods I dive into quite a bit in the fourth and final book of the Bloodbound series, which is Blood Queen. And I go into another tier of vampires. So you've got half-bloods, which are vampire, they were human and turned. Pure bloods was they had two vampire parents. And then old bloods, there's no human blood ever. However, you would be able to determine that or dictate that. But I dive into that actually in the final book.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see here. This may or may not be a thing, but how does the sirens, Isa specifically, desperate need for fresh air serve as both a literal and symbolic moment in the story?
I think it's she wants the choice to be in the sea or on land. She wants to be able to take back decisions because she was told by the sirens that were trying to protect her when she was younger, you have to do this. You have to stay underwater. It's the only way you can stay safe. But another thread of this novel is definitely curiosity, because we are curious creatures and we want to travel. We want to see other things. We want to be around other people. So I think it was the choice, or being able to have that choice, autonomy even. But sometimes curiosity kills the cat, or curiosity catches the siren.
Definitely. Well, you mentioned that you really enjoyed the body horror. So I'm not sure what the answer to this question is going to be. What was the most challenging scene for you to write in this book?
Not the body horror, actually. That was the
most
fun.
I'd be like, oh, the body horror was really intense. It really got to me. He's like, no, I loved it.
There was a whole chapter where I was about to, when I was first writing it, I was like, okay, I never want to write a boring chapter, but I have to have this travel scene put in. And they're traveling for so much of the book. It's like, how do I keep it engaging? And I decided to write a scene where Isa has to wear clothing. And in my head, I was like, this is the stupidest thing ever, but I'm just going to write it because the worst that can happen is I delete it and start over. And the amount of feedback I got on that chapter, people loving it, but I struggled with it because I thought it was really stupid at first. So I'm glad I ran with it because it got positive feedback. And I think it added an element of lightness to this book and to the series, because the rest of the books are quite a bit darker than Song of the Sea. I'd say Song of the Sea has a lot more, it's got more good characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, your novel, Ashenheart, definitely. This one doesn't shy away from brutal realities, exploitation, moral compromise, and the high cost of survival. So which aspect of this dark world do you hope challenges readers the most, and how do you want them to grapple with it once they close the book?
That's a really loaded question.
Yeah, like, what do you want them to take 2 weeks to get over?
Well, I make some hard decisions in this book with my characters. So hopefully they never get over some of those aspects, some of those decisions I made with the writing. I want to break my characters' hearts I want to break my readers' hearts with the stories I write. I feel like I haven't really accomplished it if I haven't left somebody going, but why did you do that? I kind of want them to be mad at me.
Yeah.
So that would be a good takeaway, I'd say. I hope people have fun with this book, as well as feel the the sadness that's kind of permeated throughout from all the tragedy that all the characters, both historically and to date, feel through the read of this book.
What is that reading something that really is almost soul crushing, puts you into this state of sadness, almost to the point where it's pleasurable, like there's some sort of masochism involved? Have you ever noticed that? Like sometimes it feels good to be in the depths of sadness.
I think it allows us to get out of our own minds. And, I don't read a book and I go, oh my God, their lives are so much worse than mine. But all my characters, their lives are awful. So if I'm having a hard day and I read about a character who's struggling, it takes me completely out of my own stresses for someone else to have something worse going
on. Could we make some connection to empathy, possibly?
Oh, sure. I have that too.
Okay, I'm just making sure you're not a psych. No, I'm just playing. Yeah, and also I sometimes wonder, like, I don't know if it's this way with you. I have to really fight to stay out of it, but have you ever gotten into self-pity about something, or sometimes just get into self-pity about something because it feels good, like a warm down comforter? Like it's the ultimate form of like self-centeredness.
Oh, 100%. I mean,
yeah.
Misery loves company, right? So sometimes you can get in your own head and just be like frustrated and maybe take it out on someone. And the same goes for like, sometimes I just really want to cry. Not often, but sometimes I'm like, I need a good purge, ugly cry. And I hate to admit it, but the Notebook gets me every time. As problematic as it is, I will put on the Notebook just to cry.
Really?
Yeah, I hate that.
I haven't ever read the book, but I've seen the movie, and I definitely don't like the beginning with, I can't even remember who the actors are.
Ryan Gosling and Rachel
Ryan
McAdams.
Gosling. I was about to say, who's the stud muffin? Yeah, like that whole dramatic back and forth coquettish dance that they do is just, it's been done a million times and it's obnoxious.
Terrible.
But I absolutely love the premise of being in love with somebody, going through the very real hell of being in Alzheimer's, dementia, whatever, to the point that they don't remember you, but figuring out a way to bring them back to you is to read them the story of, the way they fell in love. Like, to me, there's something just really amazing about that. The rest of the movie just fucking sucks, but that premise to me is amazing. Whoever came up with that. Yeah.
I've never read the book, but yeah, there's just something about the film where, again, it's problematic. I don't agree with a lot of it, but when you're madly in love, you do stupid things.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'll give them that.
Yes, indeed. Well, speaking of love, what was the love dynamic between Nikolai and Isa? Because, I mean, you've got two different species, for lack of a better word. And, I don't want to give anything away, but is there a love dynamic? Is it like platonic love on steroids? Does it go further than that?
I think if we're forced, because there's kind of a forced proximity trope in this book where these two characters are constantly in a isolated space together, and they're constantly looking out for each other and trying to save each other's lives, and they have these soft moments of intimacy. I think it would be impossible to not fall in love. First off, Isa hasn't seen anybody in a decade, and Nikolai's never really had anyone care for him the way Isa does. So I think it's just a product of their situation. I don't want to say too much to avoid spoiling the book. I think platonic on steroids with an essence of romantic love is in there. And I don't think it's equal on both sides.
Let me bring up your bibliography here. Let's see. Just want to show these displayed. Okay. So I had a question about the chronology of your books here. So if I remember correctly, some books in the series were originally released by another publisher and then later revised to create the series. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I went through a vanity press for the first 2 books, and then I submitted my 3rd book to Quill and Crow, and they took on the whole series with a whole fresh start. So it's gotten a little bit confusing for people who were kind of there for the beginning of it. But the Quill and Crow ones are displayed as you're showing. So Blood Coven, Ashen Heart, Song of the Sea, and coming out in May is Blood Queen. And then you will see on like my Goodreads that I've got 2 books that also say they're part of the Bloodbound series, and they're called Red, which is Blood Coven, and Isa, which is Song of the Sea. So essentially they've just been re-edited, republished, retitled, recovered, which has led to a little bit of confusing. Oh, this one, Blood Queen, I'm so excited for.
Awesome.
I think they nailed it with the cover.
Yeah. Yeah, put a pin in that because I want to hear about that. But coming back to Song of the Sea, was there anything significant that you had to cut from the final draft that you wish you could have kept?
We didn't cut much at all out of Song of the Sea. I don't know why, but it was like the crispiest writing that I've done, where it just wrote itself and everything flowed quite nicely. And I think it's because I took the approach of never write a boring chapter. And I think some books have to have boring chapters because there has to be world building or exposition or, just some way of shaping. But Song of the Sea, I didn't run into that for some reason. I don't know what I did differently, but it didn't have excess.
No darlings to kill?
No, other than Kashmir's little story, but it was like a paragraph. It wasn't like a whole chapter or anything. It was just a little mention. So,
do you have any recurring darlings? Like, I know that's kind of a weird term, recurring darlings, but like, things that when it comes to the editing process, you're like, I did it again. My editor's going to tell me I got to cut this shit out.
It's more in a, not necessarily the things I write, but it's how I write them. I love run-on sentences and I love comma splices. Bane of my existence. I just love a long run-on sentence with like slightly incorrect usage of commas just for like dramatic flair.
Okay.
Yeah. But not anything like particularly content-based.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what tools or methods do you use to organize your story? Do you use notebooks, Scrivener, storyboards?
Notebooks and cue cards. When I had to reorganize, because Blood Queen has multiple POVs, just like Blood Coven does, and I realized that not everything's happening at the same time frame. So figuring out what needed to be revealed when, putting it all out on QR codes, or not QR codes. It's been a long day. Cue cards. Yeah. And then putting it on a table and just like standing above it and then shuffling. That was very helpful.
Okay. Well, as I alluded to earlier, and I couldn't hang on to it, the beginning of the book, you included a pronunciation guide for the exotic names in the book. How do you approach naming characters in general? Do you focus on meaning, sound, or something else?
So usually names just come to me. And if a name comes to me, I tend to vibe with that character a lot better. But with Song of the Sea, it was very location based. So I knew in the original version, this was based in Iceland. So I looked up Icelandic names that had kind of an ocean feel and also a Little Mermaid-esque, Aurelia, King Eriker. Those names kind of already wrote themselves because I wanted to touch on the Little Mermaid lore. And then as for Nikolai, Roman, Ivan, Vlad, it was very Slavic names because Osleka was originally Russia, Eastern Europe and Russia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if this book was to be adapted into a film or series, what elements would you be most excited or nervous about seeing on screen?
If Tom Hardy could play Roman, I could die happy.
What do you talk like this?
He would.
Oh my God, there's too many sirens. You think darkness is your ally in the ocean.
It would be very much his Mad Max voice, I think, because he talks very little in that, but then with an essence of the Bane voice for sure. I don't know. He just has this demeanor. I watched him in Taboo, which was a TV show that I didn't even really like that much, but his character in it was just so unique and just consumed the show and the screen. And that's just kind of how I see Roman. He's like a show stealer because he loves being the center of attention. He doesn't act like he does, but he absolutely does. So I think Tom Hardy would absolutely nail that role. So here's to manifesting.
Yeah, put that out into the ether.
Yeah, I know. Film location would be Iceland. So yeah, I've got a whole cast in my head.
Dope. Oh, who's the rest of the cast?
And Nikolai is Charlie Hunnam, like from Sons of Anarchy. Ivan is Travis Fimmel from Vikings, like Ragnar from Vikings.
Okay.
And Isa is Elizabeth Olsen.
Elizabeth Olsen.
Scarlet Witch from the Marvel series.
I'm not that well versed in fan. Let's see.
Fair.
Elizabeth Olsen with a O or an E? Okay. This is her. Oh yeah. All right.
You found her.
And she's in what?
She's in like the Marvel Avengers.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, would you like to read a passage from the book?
Oh, sure.
I've been doing this thing where in post I add music to it. So.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. How long can I read? Like a page and a half?
Whatever you like.
Okay. In an almost drunken state himself, he made it back to the safe house without any complications aside from the witch's voice ringing inside of his head. He did not know what sort of balance he was seeking or even what it meant to have balance. Shaking the thoughts from his head, he stepped into the house and felt eyes on him immediately. When he glanced at the siren, wishing that he at least knew her name, he offered her the closest thing to a smile that he could. Walking past her, he fed the fire with a few logs, then collapsed into a large chair. Hands resting on the arms, he began to pick at the loose threads. Her eyes were still on him, and he could not resist looking at her. When he glanced up and met her gaze, he saw that she was smiling. "What do you have to smile about?" he asked. She cocked her head to the side, her tongue darting out to dampen her lips before she blushed, shying away. Nikolai noted that while she still looked like she had been beaten half to death, she looked healthier. Maybe it was the smile. "We'll move on in a few days' time. We cannot stay here," he sighed, glancing at the blacked-out window. "The journey will be hard, and I do not have anything more comfortable for transporting you, but I'll get you to a safe place." She responded with a nod. She beckoned him closer then, a simple wave of her webbed hand. Nikolai felt unable to disobey her command, as if the stories he was told as a child were true, and sirens lured men to their demise. Rising from his chair, he knelt by the edge of her glass box. She reached out and grabbed his wrapped hands. Slowly, she began to unwrap the bandages. Her fingers were clammy as they gently peeled back the cloth. When they were exposed, he remained still while she looked over his cut-up hands. Bruises that extended down the length of the back of his hand, knuckles cut with blood and dirt smeared over them. Some people believe that a siren's kiss can heal people, that their kiss can heal all wounds, diseases, and ailments. He told her, though he did not believe it. It was something his brother would have believed, but not him. Sirens and vampires didn't have powers. They just had problems. My brother believes in all of that, he added quietly. She narrowed her eyes and moved her hand to the back of his head. The water sloshed out of the box as she moved, pulling her upper half out, one hand on the edge of it to hold her up. Her hand felt so strange on the back of his neck, but soothing too. Half of him expected her to break his neck, though he knew she did not have the strength to do that. The other half of him expected her to kiss him, yet he was still surprised when she did. Her color-drained lips pressed against his, and he was so startled by the salty kiss that he did not kiss her back. When she pulled away, she dipped her head down, but kept her eyes peering up at him through loose blonde locks. Her tongue pressed against her own canine before darting back inside her mouth. Her eyes told him that she was proving that they had no powers, nothing special about them. Her kiss would do nothing for anyone, and it would cure no ailments and save no lives. Nikolai pressed his fingers to his lips, the phantom of her kiss still lingering. Then she reached her hand up and lifted his lip, exposing his fangs. Studying them, she narrowed her amber eyes into slits. Nikolai didn't move, shocked but intrigued by her strange behavior. Part of him believed it was her opening up to him, the early stages of trust developing. Slowly, she released him and bent her head to the side. "You are not man." She spoke so softly that Nikolai thought he imagined it. "Not really." "I'm not? What makes man?" "Greed," she whispered.
Beautiful. See, that's why I use the words like platonic love on steroids, because it's right there on the precipice, kind of like straddling the fence, so to speak. Yeah.
Definitely.
It's very interesting the way you wrote them, their interaction. Well, tell us about Blood Queen.
Oh, the final book that I have been waiting so many years to have out there. Blood Queen is the book I never knew was going to exist. The entire writing process of this series was never supposed to be a series. And after I wrote Blood Coven, Song of the Sea, and Ashen Heart, I realized I needed to write an ending for the characters that I left behind in Blood Coven. The characters in Song of the Sea don't have a ton to do with Blood Queen, but I left all the characters hanging in Blood Coven, so people have been waiting like years for the end, for the wrap up of their story, because I kind of just left them completely in chaos. So Blood Queen ties all three of the books together. Again, Song of the Sea is kind of its own entity in a way, but Ashen Heart, Blood Coven, and Blood Queen are very much tied together, connected, and I needed to write an ending. So many fantasy series never get the end.
Yeah. Well, kind of shifting over to your personal life, has there been any big changes in your life since we last spoke, which was what, a year ago? Something like that?
Probably. I think it was like March or April last year, because I had my hand was wounded at the time.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Healed up really
nice. What happened? Yeah, what happened again? I can't remember.
Oh, I caught on fire. Yeah.
I won't make you recount the trauma.
It healed up really nice, and that's the important thing.
It did. It looks good.
Nothing major. I've been living that homeowner life where I just constantly find things to do and fix and change and alter in my home.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's pretty much consumed my whole life between that and work. Nothing that exciting. Although I am changing gears a little bit with my writing career. So I guess that's kind of an excitement coming. I'm changing genres and everything once Blood Queen is out.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, let's see here. I don't know if this is really a correctly worded question or not. What was the biggest challenge in fusing all the complex storylines of all four books together into a cohesive narrative? Because I know they kind of can stand alone, but I guess as cohesive as the tenor, style, theme, and feeling go.
I think the hardest part was making Blood Coven fit, because I had to completely rewrite Blood Coven to set the stage for everything else. And Blood Queen kind of has similar elements where I'm working with so many characters and making sure each of their stories are told properly and thoroughly, and continuing on with their specific character developments and traits. It's hard to navigate that many characters and make sure you're doing it justice. So that was kind of the hardest piece, and making sure timelines are accurate.
Yeah,
Cue cards. Cue cards.
Definitely. I don't know if I'd be able to keep track and manage that much information, that much connected information. But I'm sure you handled it with the aplomb of an accomplished wordsmith.
I do hope so.
Well, Sabrina, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. I'm very happy for coming on, and that you wanted me back a second time.
Hell yeah. Well, so as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug or let your readers know about that we haven't covered, or maybe some things you would like to reiterate?
Well, I'll reiterate that you can read any of the Bloodbound series books, the first 3, in any order. So if there's one that sparks your interest more than the other, pick that one up. As you've experienced, because you read book 2, then 3.
Yeah.
And hopefully there wasn't too much confusion. So
No.
Good. You can find me at Sabrina Voerman pretty much anywhere, at Facebook, Instagram, my website. I have not ventured onto Twitter, nor will I. Not at this point.
Are you on Blue Sky yet?
No, honestly, I can barely manage my Instagram.
I know, it's exhausting, isn't it?
It's like a full-time job on top of a full-time job.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Sabrina Voerman will get you to all the links. Yeah, Goodreads, and I think Storygraph too, but I haven't ventured on there a whole lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, listeners at home, both live and on demand, all those links will be in the description. And Sabrina, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can watch the episodes live. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest writers and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.